Welcome today to Allan Gerlat. Thank you, Allan, for coming on Green is Good. We have Allan on the phone, and Allan has been the editor of Waste and Recycling News since 1995, and he's leading the waste industry into the green revolution. Allan, welcome to Green is Good.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Mike.
It's good to have you. You are just an incredible. I mean, what a great guest you're going to be today, because John and I are holding copies of your publication, and anybody that works for a living and is any kind of a career field, everybody has got their publication that kind of speaks to the entire industry. And this, boy, I've just gotten an education about the waste and recycling industry in a few simple pages here. You're doing a great job with this.
Well, I appreciate hearing that, Mike. It's a fun business to cover. I mean, it's for a journalist. It's got a lot of it's a very topical subject, obviously, and you've got people on strong feelings on all sides of the issue. So it's great. It's a great business to cover, and it's obviously a very critical issue to society.
Hey, Allan, I fibbed a little bit in my intro because your great publication was not called Waste and Recycling News when you launched it in 1995. Why don't you share with our listeners what it was called then and when you changed the name to Waste and Recycling, and why and what was that all about?
Sure. We were Waste News for 14 or 15 years. We're going into our 15th year here. We've always covered recycling. It's always been an integral part of what we write about. Obviously, it's an integral part of the whole waste environmental management scene. We really put the name, and we've had debates over the years about our name, and it's been a hot point certainly for segments of our audience who, frankly, did not like our name at all because it implied waste has got a pejorative connotation to it, certainly, and certainly the segments like the scrap market where there was a business loss where the recycling was considered a waste and that hurt them business-wise. It was an issue for them. So, but we decided about a year ago that we wanted to look more hard at the scrap market, particularly as not only a business that we're already covering, but we wanted to cover that more, and also it had some business opportunities for us as well too. So we put the name in there, and it's not really we are covering recycling perhaps incrementally more, but really it's not any kind of a seismic change in terms of what we're covering. But it's really, I think, gotten us a lot of better perception, and certainly in certain markets where they just saw the waste news is sort of a negative thing, and not really reflecting the positive elements of the whole environmental management, what opportunities there are there.
Got it. And how has it been received in the industry since you launched the new name?
Very well. It's people, again, certainly segments that had a problem with our name, the negative connotations of that. They are very pleased with the name, and it's, I think it's encouraged some more business opportunities for us. And it's certainly it's been well received generally in the market. And again, people that know us know that it's not like we've just discovered recycling, certainly in the last year, but I think it's more appropriate in describing exactly who we are and what environmental management is about, because recycling is such a critical part. You can't separate it from any kind of waste management, and certainly what the waste management companies are doing these days is reflecting that as well too. That you've got companies, the big companies like Waste Management, Republic, that are much more involved in recycling than they were a few years ago. So in that sense, it's just we're reflecting how the industry, I think, is changing. The solid waste industry is changing as well.
Hey, Allan, when since I'm in the waste and the recycling industries, when I'm short on time, I look at your headlines and then I flip right open to your page, and I always read your editor's view if I'm short on time to read through the whole publication at that moment. And you are really banging the drum and leading the way in so many ways, and on how you're helping shape and influence the industry. Why don't you share with our listeners a little bit some of the hotter topics that are out there, that you've covered recently, such as the National Recycling Coalition's Chapter 7 filing and what the fallout, what does that mean to our listeners and the nation as a whole in terms of the recycling efforts and other issues that are real topical to the industry right now?
Right. I think the National Recycling Coalition's troubles are troubling. I think for the recycling business and for going forward, there's a lot of debate and as far as what kind of impact the NRC has really had on recycling, and then people argue that it doesn't have that much of an impact, and going away wouldn't be the end of recycling by any means. And I don't think anybody's really saying that that's would be a death blow for recycling. But it is the most prominent recycling organization, and I think, certainly a symbolic purpose is nothing else, that it's the future of that organization is, if they don't carry on in a similar form, it seems to me that's got to be a symbolic blow, if nothing else, for recycling, and I hope they're able to carry on. But and they're trying to right now. They initially talked about filing for Chapter 7, which would be just basically dissolution. But now they're looking at some opportunities of trying to get out from under their credit debt, and I think they've addressed maybe half of the debt that they're facing, but they still have $600,000 or so, I think, to try to address. And they have virtually no cash right now, so it's an uphill battle as far as what they're facing to keep going on. What I find interesting and disturbing, frankly, with the whole debate that's gone on with the National Recycling Coalition. I mean, they were presenting a merger proposal with Keep America Beautiful over the summer, and there was a lot of strong debate, pro and con, on that, and then it ended up failing. And then a few days later, the NRC said it was going to file for Chapter 7. So it tells you how serious their situation was. But even now, I'm seeing a lot of, and maybe it's vocal minority in the recycling community, but a lot of people that were really distrustful and even had a malevolent attitude toward corporate involvement in the organization and in the recycling movement. And to me, I'm a pragmatic person, and I think I don't see how you can really move recycling forward without really getting the corporate community involved and getting them on your side in terms of recycling. I think beyond that, if you're not doing that, you're really kind of just not that much more than a charming hippie movement. And because the corporate movement to get them behind recycling, I think, is where if recycling is going to move forward and get really serious beyond where it's at, I think you just have to have corporate involvement. Plus the reality that you need to have financial support as an organization, and they were a big part. I think Coca-Cola was a third of their financial support when they at last count. So the realities are you might like to think that we don't want to have anything to do with corporate America because they're evil, but to me that's not the way the world works, and just as far as is their self-sufficiency, and also just there is such a big part of the waste stream and environmental management that I think you just need to get them on board.
Sure.
And I think you'd want to because they're getting them on your side is going to be integral to really pushing recycling forward, because they have such influence in our habits and how environmental management is treated.
Well, speaking of corporate America, we're going to take a break to our corporate sponsors, and we're going to come on back with Allan Gerlat and Green is Good.
If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so happy and honored to have Allan Gerlat with us today on the phone. Allan from Waste and Recycling News, and if you want to see his great publication online, just go to wasteandrecyclingnews.com. Allan, you left us right before the break with the story of the National Recycling Coalition and good intentions that sometimes can go astray if people don't keep one of the key core principles of sustainability in mind, which is profits, because obviously people and planet is critical, but you can't be a sustainable business model unless you make a profit or turn a profit at some point.
Absolutely, and I think that's the exciting thing about the green movement, that corporate America really is starting to realize that it's in their financial best interest to become more green. And certainly there's a marketing self-image value, certainly in these days, especially when it's been the hot topic, and everybody wants to appear that they're being green, and that's a great marketing thing for their consumers. But I think for the bottom line, there's clearly seeing more and more advantages of greater efficiencies in terms of materials, and reducing energy costs, and that there's clearly great advantages to being environmental just from a bottom line aspect. And they talk about the triple bottom line with environmental aspect as well too, but it all goes together. And I think corporate Americans, certainly the bigger companies and savvier companies, I think, are realizing that. John, you're in the electronics field, companies like Hewlett Packard and Dell are I think leading the way, and I think that's seeing that in different markets, that there are certain companies that are realizing it first and maybe setting the bar, and that's going to lead other companies perhaps down that road as well.
You're right, and and I don't want to be a downer, but I want to talk. Mike and I always try to hit on all the elements of sustainability that we can, and one of the key elements of the recycling movement and the sustainability movement is people. And I do want to bring up one of your colleagues who recently passed, and I had a personal experience with him, Joe Truini, who was one of your reporters, and he actually interviewed me a couple times and was just a wonderful guy and had such a heart for the industry, the recycling movement, and he was only 37 when he passed. And I have to tell you, my compliments are to you, because you wrote a very touching piece on Joe when he met his very early end, and I just want to say, my hat's off to you for how you run your organization and how well you write and how you respect and show your caring for not only just your industry but for the human element part of it. And Allan, that you really gave him great honor.
Well, I appreciate that, John, and Joe was a great guy, and it was quite a shock. It still is a shock to all of us that happened. Joe was a hardcore marathoner, and he was, the person in the office who, on the face of it, you'd think he's the last person that would have any kind of physical issues. He was in the best shape of just about anybody, but obviously there was something ticking below that none of us saw. But the thing that was, and it was really a tough thing for our staff and everything, just everybody involved that knew Joe, because he was such a great guy and touched so many people. But it really was heartwarming to get an outpouring of, and that's really what it was, an outpouring of sympathy and support from the recycling community. You're journalists and you cover stories and you feel like you're detached somewhat and you're not really part of it, and part of that is necessary to keep some kind of distance in that. But it really was heartwarming and really helped us, I think, in getting through that, to know that he really had a lot of support. It kind of told me that the recycling community, I think particularly, these are passionate people that really care about what they're involved in, and they see themselves as a community, and he was a part of that, and it was like one of their own had fallen, and it was a nice feeling that these are people that really are caring about each other as well as what they're trying to do.
Well, you gave him great honor, and he'll be missed for sure from your publication and from his family. I know that.
I appreciate that.
Hey, we live in great and interesting times, Allan, and 13 or 14 years ago when the internet started taking a new life, people didn't know if that was a fad or a trend. And obviously after 2001, 2002, when Google became part of our vernacular, we knew it was a trend that was here to stay. I feel, and we want to know your opinion, fad or trend, the green revolution, fad or trend, the recycling revolution. And now that we have, it looks like, some great political will in Washington, where is this trend going to go, if you believe it's a trend also?
Yeah, I think there's some fad element to it. I think what we've seen in the last couple of years, just in terms of kind of a green obsession, everybody's jumping on board with that. That level is probably not going to sustain itself, but I really think that there's a definite cultural change that's happening, and I think real cultural change doesn't happen dramatically. It happens more as an evolution, and I think that evolution is happening. What I talked about earlier, I think corporate America more and more is taking that and that's becoming a part of how they do business, and I think people, they've been long. Most people are into recycling and that, but I think they're starting to get the bigger picture of issues of energy reduction and getting energy efficient lighting and maybe reducing the energy costs in other ways. But there's also elements that I think that we're less quick to take on to absorb. We still like our SUVs, and I think part of that is an American mentality that might be hard to change. I think we I love America, but we are a very consumer-oriented, material-oriented culture, maybe more than most countries, even Europe and such. Compare how their attitudes are toward recycling and just material reduction. And part of that is by necessity. We have the luxury of such space, and so we can dump things, and we don't have to conserve resources as much as other countries do. And that's a nice advantage, but I think it causes us to lose our edge a little bit. So I think people I think that's evolving that way, but there still certainly areas that we're a ways away from even other parts of the world in terms of environmental consciousness being really a part of how we think and how we approach things.
Give us a little bit of Allan's crystal ball, though. When we were introducing you at the top of the show, we were giving some broad statistics. 54% of most of our waste goes to a landfill. 33 or so % is recycled. Are those numbers going to start creeping towards each other and become one day inverse here in the United States? Or how do you see it?
Mm-hmm. I think that they will eventually, but I think it's going to take a long time. Now, certainly over on the West Coast, where you guys are, that there's much more. There's the mandates in the major cities that have 50 and 75% recycling, and they're meeting that, and there's much more consciousness, I think, on the West Coast than there is in other parts of the country. So that's obviously showing that it's possible in America and then populated parts of the country. So I think it can move in that direction, but it may take a long while. And it may not be in our generation that it happens, but it might. It depends, on possibly how much the government gets involved. I'm not sure, in the Midwest how much, and certainly, in places where there's cheap landfill space, in Texas and those areas that's going to happen real quickly just because of economics. But I think it's going to evolve that way, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head, Allan, when you're talking about it being an evolutionary process. While it's a revolutionary idea, and there is certainly the revolutionary component to it, people don't change their habits overnight, and this is really about habits and what we do every day, getting people into the habit to just think in terms of recycling. And you're right, too, that, California and on the West Coast, there are bellwether states out here, California being one of them. A lot of people worldwide get their ideas about what America's like because they think it's all like California, or either that or New York City, because that's
right,
where most of the TV shows and the movies are being made. But it's a very good point that you make also, that in the West and certain portions of the country, geographically, we've had the luxury of the space. And that's what really gave us the attitude, not so much because we're inherently selfish, but we haven't had to, by geography and by nature, had to confront some of the issues space-wise, and what do we do with our waste products that other countries have had to. You make a very good point.
Yeah, and I think that's, human nature. Everybody wants to do good, I believe, basically, but sometimes you have to be really forced into a situation where you're pressed to make really major gains, and certainly in Europe, I don't think that they're that much different mentally than we are. I think they're the same philosophy, but they're geographically, they don't have the landfill space. They've had tougher economic times, wars and that, where I think the culture has been more that they've had to conserve resources more than we've had to in America, so that's become part of the culture because it really had to be, I think, more so than in America.
Given that we've just gone through an economic earthquake in this country, what effect has that had on the recycling and environmental and sustainability movements?
Yeah, I think, again, human nature, people want to be environmental and want to recycle, but an economic downturn, people's first concern, understandably, is going to be keeping their jobs, keeping their pay, and, really that's what the first focus is going to be. I think perhaps a benefit of the economic downturn, though, for environmentalism and recycling is that people are forced to be more frugal in their lifestyle. Maybe hang on to things longer than they would otherwise. Not buy as much disposable, just packaging and stuff that ends up in the landfill, and maybe have more time to focus on recycling and that. So, I'm amazed. I saw the statistic about cell phones and it may have got even more so since I read this, but people are getting a new cell phone every 18 months, and it's just a sign of our disposable society, and perhaps that's slowing down with the economic slowdown that people are maybe hanging on to things a little longer, and therefore they're not ending up in landfills.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the 3 environmental R's, because I don't want to assume that anyone knows anything or has heard anything before, and you're so well-versed in all this. Recycle, reduce, and reuse. Can you just compare the efforts in those 3 areas and what's really going on in your industry and across America?
Right. Yeah, I think we, kind of what I was alluding to before, I think we're a little kind of pick and choose what we, not for any conscious reason, but kind of what we focus on. And I think recycling is something that people really focus on because they can see an immediate benefit and an immediate logic to it. I mean, you've got these pop cans and newspapers that, why should you just throw them out? And it just makes sense to, okay, we'll take them somewhere and they'll be turned into products. And it is a great idea. Yeah, reduction is, I think, and reuse is something we haven't really bought into as well as the recycling aspect. And again, I think it goes to the American mentality of we like stuff and we like to, it kind of goes against our mentality, I think, to get the reduction part of it, which really is the best, ideally, part of the equation, that you're reducing the amount of stuff that's generated to begin with, rather than having to find use for it, which is what recycling does and such. So I think that's something that's harder for us to take in terms of just really self-denying ourselves on stuff like that. And the reuse issue, we might give stuff to Goodwill, but we're not as big on getting stuff like that and using our cell phones longer, or just even getting old cell phones and using that. That's kind of, I think, harder for us to accept as Americans.
Well, Allan, you're really one of the green thought leaders in our industry. I'm appreciative of all that you're doing. I have the benefit of reading your great editorial every week, so I just want to say thank you. And Mike and I are so appreciative and honored that you took the time to come on our show today. And thank you for all that you're doing at Waste and Recycling News. And if any of our listeners want to go read what Allan writes or his great staff writes, you could go to wasterecyclingnews.com, wasterecyclingnews.com. Allan Gerlat, thank you, and you are living proof that green is good.
Thank you much, John. Mike, keep up the good work.